Economics of Africa's EU. When you think of Africa, you may think of war-based economies, breathtaking nature, and small countries trying to struggle out of the poverty trap. A phenomenon that this region knows well. A poverty trap is an economic phenomenon where a lack of access to credit, healthcare, educational resources, regional instability, or a number of other factors can lead to a country staying impoverished in spite of having access to natural resources, external markets, and a working-age population. For many of us in the West, all we've known of Africa has been a trickle of images of countries in poverty traps or instability, like the Rwandan genocide, the Ethiopian famine, or the Battle of Mogadishu. The European Union example. Isn't it impossible to grow an economy in a region filled with conflicts, poverty, and militant nationalism? 1900s Europe disagrees with that preconception. It's hard to imagine Europe without the EU today. Many viewers may not even be old enough to remember Europe before the fall of the Soviet Union, the reunification of Germany, and the Treaty of Maastricht in the early 90s. The early 90s saw the European Economic Community undergo a metamorphosis and leapfrog the wealth of its neighbours once again. For this event to occur, not only did it take a dozen countries that had been enemies for hundreds of years to adopt the same currency and let their former enemies free travel within their borders, in many cases it also required the dissolution of long-lived and brutal dictatorships. António de Oliveira Salazar, the previous dictator, ruled Portugal as its prime minister for 36 years. He took power during the Great Depression, almost the same year that the National Socialists took absolute control of Germany and held the country in a chokehold until 1968, about halfway through the Vietnam War for reference. There were people who were born under a brutal dictator and had kids, and their kids lived to be old enough to have kids under the same dictator. Why does this matter? One by one, the countries of the modern EU stabilized. This stabilizing unification process didn't happen overnight. Like a house, it was built brick by brick, country by country. To many living in Europe in the 40s to 80s, a unified Europe was science fiction. Hell, a unified Germany was science fiction. However, after a few key moments, those watching could see the European Union forming. Today, those paying attention can see a similar economic entity looking to evolve into a nation today, in East Africa. Today, a treaty like the Maastricht Treaty that created the European Union or the Treaty of Paris to create the United States is being drafted. Planned to be drafted by the end of 2021 and implemented by 2023, the country that would be created would be known as the East African Federation. This nation, just like the EU or the USA, will be a majority Christian English-speaking nation. It will have a truly enormous population to draw from. With nearly 200 million people, it would be the 8th most populated country on the planet. It would have a young population poised to make an economic miracle take place with an average age of 18 years old, and as an economy, it would sit roughly on par with Greece or the Czech Republic with a GDP of 193.7 billion. Given that the EAF has a population almost 20 times that of the Czech Republic, you can start to see the biggest challenge to overcome for the new nation: economics, or more specifically per capita GDP, a classic poverty trap. While explaining the new nations of this country, you will also get a picture of how the East African Federation seeks to escape its poverty trap. Uganda and South Sudan, the Rentiers. Uganda, along with Tanzania and Kenya, are among the oldest cooperating states in the region. These three formed their first try at the East African Community, the East African Customs Union, all the way back in 1927. However, Uganda and South Sudan, a more recent addition to the Eastern African Community, share a common problem: their widely accepted statuses as rentier states. A rentier state is a term coined by economist Hazim El-Berblawi. It describes a country that does not develop its own economy or people. Rather, it survives via a substantial external rent being paid. Don't worry, it isn't as bad as it sounds. The rent usually comes in the form of a bribe, and if it makes you feel better, the bribes are almost exclusively paid to the government. Well, maybe it wasn't as bad as it sounds if you work for the morally erroneous government. This, possibly more than the recent civil wars, stands in front of the country's path to progress. To put it flatly, Uganda and South Sudan are oil-based nations, but their oil rules them more than they benefit from it. South Sudan and Uganda are among the two most oil-rich nations in Africa, and both need a stable, non-corrupt partner to get this product to oceans and external markets. South Sudan and Uganda could be very rich nations, but with oil and mining accounting for almost all of their exports, falling commodity prices and rising security-related costs hammered the country's economy. It's no wonder why this region is struggling to leverage these resources into widespread wealth. Outside the oil sector, the majority of the population is employed in traditional agriculture, although violence often prevents farmers from planting or harvesting crops. Looking at the most recent proposals for pipelines in the region, you can see the oil-rich interior nations' plans to avoid the countries which they have traditionally had to negotiate with to move oil through, like Sudan. Joining the East African Confederation should remedy some of these economic issues with getting products to market safely, as well as protect these nations from neighbors who have historically been at conflict with the people within these northern oil-producing states. Burundi and Rwanda, brother countries. Rwanda and Burundi are two of the four countries in Africa defined by the traditional tribal borders rather than the colonial partition or war. The other two being Eswatini and Lesotho within South Africa, but that's a different video. Rwanda's name is blood-stained worldwide. The Rwandan genocide saw the deaths of approximately 800,000 Tutsis at the hands of the Hutu-led government in 1994. It is less known, but this same conflict happened within Burundi and has scarred the country ever since. The following 27 years, Rwanda has reinvented itself. It has an average GDP growth rate of 7% per year, has some of the best growing metrics, life expectancy being at 68.7 years, infant mortality declining at almost 5% per year, 25.2 per 1,000 live births, and literacy at 73.2%. These are easily comparable to Burundi's metrics, a country with similar history, geography, and resources. Burundi is the poorest country in the world by GDP and GDP per capita. Nearly 40 deaths per 1,000 births and a life expectancy of 61.25 years, making it the 20th highest in the world. The difference? The influence of Paul Kagame. Rwanda invested in infrastructure, rails, roads, and air transport continually for nearly 2 decades and is now close to an average developed country in Africa. They maintained a stable currency, the Rwandan franc. They invested in education and have a primary school enrollment of 97%, approximately equal to the United States, and marketed itself as a low-risk, low-tax, and attractive investment. This stability is exactly what Burundi needs, and it is the single most important thing to gain from joining the East African Federation. This also leans into what the countries want from the Union. Both are small countries that currently must rely on external sources for defense, security, and access to global markets. Burundi and Rwanda share a common language, English and Swahili, religion, and colonial history with the other Eastern African Community countries. These countries both have demons to overcome, but they both have serious assets to bring to the Union. Burundi possesses many undeveloped precious metals in their borders. Outside all that glitters, it is a beautiful region with extraordinary beaches along Lake Tanganyika, boasts itself as the southern source of the Nile River, marked by a pyramid, and easily could host a greater tourism industry. With their brother country Rwanda teaching them how to effectively grow their businesses and the Greater Eastern African Federation assisting them in delivering goods to international markets, it becomes much more apparent why the Eastern African Federation wants this pair of small countries in the Union, even beyond shared ethnic, language, and religious traditions. Kenya and Tanzania, the Bedrocks. Kenya and Tanzania are the largest and arguably the most stable countries of the proposed union. These countries boast the most area and the best GDP per capita. They can be viewed as analogous to France and West Germany of the original Inner Six of the European Union. Tanzania is the larger country, but it's not as wealthy as Kenya. The countries have GDPs of $63.18 billion US 2019 and $95.5 billion US 2019. They both straddle the Serengeti and house the two largest port cities in East Africa, Dar es Salaam and Mombasa. Despite China leaving Kenya with a rail line to nowhere, they still have the best regional deep water port in the area and have been the go-to alongside Dar es Salaam when the UN or USA needed to provide aid to the region. Tanzania would house the capital at Arusha, a historically significant and geographically centric city that has long been a city symbolizing stability in the region since hosting the Arusha Accords regarding the Rwandan Civil War, 1990 to 1994. Both countries are prime targets of foreign investment and on the rise. These countries' future is largely a question of how they'll succeed, not if. The powers of the world are looking at Kenya and Tanzania with great interest. China with the Belt and Road Program and America's African Continental Free Trade Area. Both countries boast a GDP growth rate of over 5% and have been stable for long enough to have other struggling countries like South Sudan and Uganda believing in them enough for a call to unite to be raised. Time will tell if the union occurs, but the East African community is in a better place today than it has been for a long time and has many of the same indicators of a successful world power or a post-World War II Europe. They have a young population eager for prosperity, powerful trade partners, and a nation that wants peace with the surrounding community.